in courtroom 600 of the Nuremberg Palace of Justice, 24 high-ranking Nazi officials stood accused of atrocities committed during the Second World War. Representatives from the United States, the Soviet Union, France, and Great Britain would hear their cases, some of which would shock the world. The trial of the major war criminals would become the most famous of the Nuremberg trials and the main event of 1946. As Hitler's Reich crumbled around him, Allied powers met in London to discuss the punishment of Nazi leaders. While the Allies agreed that those responsible for war crimes must be brought to justice, every nation had its own criminal statutes and its own views on how the trials should proceed. After 10 days of discussions, the shape of the proceedings to come became clearer. The court would be called the International Military Tribunal, and it would consist of one primary and one alternate judge from each nation. The location of the trials would be Nuremberg, Germany. In addition to having a large courthouse that had survived the war, the city had been the site of Hitler's most elaborate political rallies. It was also in Nuremberg that Nazi leaders had proclaimed the infamous Nuremberg Laws, stripping Jews of their property and basic rights. The trial began with the reading of the indictments, which concerned 4 charges: conspiracy to wage aggressive war, which addressed crimes committed before the war began; waging an aggressive war, which involved the violation of international treaties; war crimes, which included the mistreatment of prisoners of war; and crimes against humanity, which included the mass murder of Jews in concentration camps, the so-called final solution. The defendants listened as prosecutors read a detailed list of the crimes of which they stood accused. Lord Justice Geoffrey Lawrence, the British member, presided over the proceedings while a team of translators provided simultaneous translations in 4 languages: English, French, German, and Russian. The main target of the prosecution was Hitler's successor, the ambitious and flamboyant Hermann Goering. When it came to his cross-examination, Goering prepared carefully. His clever responses frustrated the American chief prosecutor, Robert Jackson. Goering evaded no questions and offered no apologies. He testified that the concentration camps were necessary to preserve order and argued that the Nazi leadership principle, which gave Hitler total power, was the same principle on which the Catholic Church and the Soviet Union's government were based. Goering's performance in the witness box prompted one journalist to describe him as a brain without a conscience. The marathon trial lasted 218 days. In that time, 240 witnesses were questioned, and large amounts of photographs, films, and statements were produced as evidence. On October 1st, 1946, 10 months after the trial had commenced, the verdict was handed down. 12 of the Nazi leaders, including Hermann Goering, were sentenced to death by hanging. 7 others were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 10 years to life, and 3 were acquitted. On the eve of his scheduled execution, Goering took a cyanide capsule and died in his prison cell. His suicide note stated that he had no objection to being shot, but he refused to be hanged. Trials of Germans, including medical doctors, legal practitioners, the SS, and high-ranking government officials, continued in Nuremberg for 2 more years. However, the International Military Tribunal had done its job. For the first time in history, an international tribunal had passed a verdict on crimes against international criminal law. The Nuremberg trials had brought those responsible for the horrors of the Second World War to justice. Although the trials did not prevent future wars of aggression or crimes against humanity, the main event of 1946 paved the way for international justice and enabled Europe to move towards peace and democracy.